Hi, my name is Sydney Rankmore. I'm an associate planner with Rick and a board member for the San Diego chapter of APA. Here with me today I have Mike Stepner. He's the former city architect for the city of San Diego and the acting planning director. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
So when was it that you chose planning as a career? Was there a moment or an event?
When I got out of the graduated college, I went to work for an architectural firm that was involved in a lot of repurposing older buildings, and they were in neighborhoods that were distressed, a lot going on, and I really got involved more. I didn't want to really deal with the details of fixing the toilets and painting the building. I wanted to fix the neighborhood that the building was in. And so that led me to think about planning in a lot of different ways. And then the Navy got me. And I was overseas. I saw different cities. And I just became very, very interested in how cities grow and wanting to do something with that. And so I came back. I went to work for a large architectural firm that did planning and worked there for 3 years in Chicago on something called the Crosstown Expressway, which never got built, but it actually came from the Burnham Plan in 1909, but changed to an expressway. And the purpose or the plan was to look at entire neighborhoods and not just a freeway. And that really got me into it in a big way. And so after that project ended, my wife and I decided to come back to California and went to work for the city for a year and stayed for 27.
If it wasn't planning or architecture, do you think, there was another career path for you?
It's funny, when I got out of the Navy, my father was in the movie business. And when I got out of the Navy, I had thought about going into art direction in movies. And he arranged a couple of interviews. And I thought, that's not real stuff. That's make-believe and imaginary. Planning is more real. I'm not so sure planning isn't make-believe and imaginary too, but I chose to go into planning, and that's where I ended up and stayed.
What has it been like for you being an architect in the planning world?
Well, I think in many ways, because I focus a lot on urban design and the physical form of the environment and how that physical form and ties in with everything else, it's a little different than the traditional city planning education. So my focus has always been more on design of the built environment and how all those things fit together. That's the entry point for my work.
Do you have any memorable projects you could share? Any that stick out in your mind through your long career? Anything?
I was very fortunate to have worked on a lot of different things over the years. So I worked on base closure of NTC. I worked on the City Heights Urban Village. I worked on the general plan. I worked on the initial design for the trolley system. That was something that Pete Wilson, when he was mayor, and Jim Mills, when he was state legislator, wanted to go to Washington, and they asked a couple of us to do the plan for the trolley system over a weekend so they could fly to Washington with it. So there's been a lot of things, and even little things. I mean, I worked with some neighborhoods on changing the parking patterns or allowing uses that perhaps were not allowed. I think planners have to do all of that, from the big vision down to the nitty-gritty of implementation.
Mm-hmm. What are kind of the core beliefs or values that you have that you bring into your planning work?
I think it's about people. And that people, that's why we're doing it. People live somewhere. The built environment has an impact on how they experience where they live, how they get about, what they do. And I think you always have to keep in mind people. And I think working with people and community engagement is critical to the process.
Now, you kind of spoke about a few memorable ones. Are there any that stick out that are particularly challenging that you remember? Any specific challenge that have kind of arisen during your career that you can point to?
There's been a number of things that we worked on and didn't happen. one of the planning commissioners used to have an award he gave out every year to the persistent planner. And that was for a planner that worked on a project that didn't have a snowball's chance in hell of ever passing, but politics were, we're going to do it, and then we're going to deny it or forget about it. And there was a lot of those things. And there were things that I can remember where the city backed off because it was going to cost too much, or they didn't want to set a precedent. I worked on the street design manual, and we also did a streetlight design manual, where streetlights should be placed. And there was the city was afraid to go forward with that streetlight policy because they were afraid of lawsuits because the streetlight policy previous had not been as good as it should have been. I mean, there's all sorts of things that planners run into, and you, I think, have to roll with the punches and see how you can bring some of this stuff back as part of a later piece of work.
So kind of zooming out to more the planning profession itself, how do you think that the profession has made a difference in our cities?
I think it's made a big difference. I think a lot of times in political circles, planners are given not a lot of credit, or they're considered to be the obstacles. But I think the planning profession and those who participate in planning, more than almost any kind of profession, see the bigger picture, how all the pieces fit together, how if you do this, it's going to affect that, and how you need to manage all that. And I think that's one of the really important things that planners do. They can bring the pieces together. They see the short term, the midterm, and the long term. And so when I was teaching, I always encouraged the architects to think about a planning career, to bring the design function into the traditional planning functions.
So that's kind of the benefits of it, but can you speak more about some of the unintended consequences of the planning profession that you've seen?
You are the scapegoat. You get thrown under the bus. I can show you some tire tracks on my back if you would like. Because in politics, you look for somebody to say you made the wrong decision or you told us the wrong thing. And I think planners get blamed a lot. We're getting blamed a lot right now in all the discussions about housing and regulation, that we sort of invented the regulation to stop housing. And I think basically the regulation came about because people reacted to something. Mm-hmm. What we need to do is tell people why we need to change the regulation, but to blame planners for the evils of regulation or what happens and doesn't happen in the city, I think is unfortunate, but it goes with the territory.
Mm-hmm. Totally. So how do you think that it's changed over the past couple of years, or maybe perhaps through your whole career? How have you seen the profession change?
Well, I think it goes in cycles. Mm-hmm. And I think there are times when planners really are held at the forefront. And there are times when they're just do your job and don't make waves. And it is cyclical. And I think we're going through a phase right now where the opportunities are there, but I think we are not being used to the best advantage of the community.
So what do you wish that maybe as a planner you had more control over, or what could we kind of do better?
Well, I think one of the things that the planners need to really do is talk with people, be engaged with the community, understand that planning is a political act, it's a social art, it's a public health discipline, and we need to really be involved with all that and really deal with the elected officials, build the respect and trust so that we can deal directly with the elected officials as well as with the community. So my father was in the movie business, and he used to tell me that making movies was this much and dealing with people was this much. If I couldn't do this, I'd never do that. I said, I'm going to be an architect. I don't need to know any of that. Too late. It was too late to tell him how right he was. Working with people is really critical to all of it.
Yeah. What advice do you have for new planners coming into the profession?
I would, number one, try to listen as much as you can to people you work with, to others that are involved with what you're doing. I think it would be also get out and see your neighborhoods, understand the community, walk. observe, take notes and take pictures and really get the feel for things. And I think then, and continue your education, not necessarily formally, but read, look, talk to people. It's a learning process that continues and continues.
And then maybe somebody a little further along, any specific survival skills you have to offer? Maybe somebody that's a few years into their career, same applies, or anything?
I think one of the things is understanding that sometimes you're playing the role of the scapegoat, and that it isn't personal, that you can rebound from that, and just keep plugging away at it.
Now, what do you see as the value of a professional organization like APA?
The value of a professional organization is to support the members, on one hand, to really provide a framework for a broader education, for advancing the goals legislatively of planning in government, and to be somebody who tells the world the role of planners and how important they are to society and to the urban environment. And I think that's what the professional organizations do, and that's what APA does.
I know you've worked in education over the years as a professor in urban design, planning, and architecture. What are the trends in education that you've seen, and what do you think people should be focusing on?
Well, I think right now the trend should be more multidisciplinary. I always had a concern when I was teaching architecture that sometimes for architects it's too narrow a focus, and it gets to be about an object versus the fabric of the community. I think we need to really be more diverse in the kinds of courses people teach, the overlap of the disciplines, so that people get courses from planning if they're in architecture, or environmental science if they're planning, whatever it may be, that there is some sort of overlap and mix to bring these different disciplines together. So you have an understanding of how things fit together, that you just don't work in a vacuum, you work in part of a total framework. And I think the schools are doing that, some are, and they're doing more of that than they have in the past. Because I can remember when I went to architectural school, if it wasn't for the fact that I took a lot of electives, I probably would have never learned what a city planner really was, that there was such a thing. So I think it's important. And I think it's important because when you get out, when you go into practice, it's no longer for an architect sitting in your ivory tower drawing the building, picture of a building, or for a planner doing some statistical analysis. It's getting to know the fact that you're working as a team, and you bring different things to the table, different professions to the table, and everybody has a piece to add to the total vision of whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. And I think that's critical. The schools need to be doing that, and we need to be working in those interdisciplinary teams when we are working in the practice.
So I know that you were active in working on the growth management ordinance, which is a bit different than the direction we're moving right now. Can you speak a bit more about that, and what are your thoughts on the current direction?
Yes, I can. I think right now we are very concerned that we have underbuilt housing. We haven't built the right kind of housing, and we don't quite know where we want to put it. But these things go in cycles. And maybe 30 years ago, in the mid-'80s, growth management was the biggest concern, that we were building too much. People would complain that they would drive in from Rancho Bernardo in the morning and they'd go through cow pastures, and going home at night they'd be going through construction sites. And there was a move to slow down the pace of housing. Different plans, different activities, and one of the things that the city did was come up with an interim development ordinance. And basically that said that only so much housing could be built in a given period of time in a given place. And it really slowed down the pace of housing. Didn't meet the needs, but it slowed down the pace. We had an exemption process called the interim development ordinance. And that was something that really was one of those projects that I regret we did, because in order to get an exemption to allow you to build, you had to justify it. And the justification forced people to say things and do things, hire consultants to say things and do things that just were not right. People would come in and say, I have to get my mother to surgery, and if I can't build this 20-unit building, I'll never have the funds to do it. People shouldn't be put through that. And instead, we should have really focused on, okay, how do we get the housing and do it right? What came out of that were 5 ballot measures. 2 in the county, 2 in the city. In the city, one at each of the county and the city was put on by the government agency, and one in each was put on by Prevent Los Angelesization Now, plan organization. And they attempted to put limits on the amount of housing that would be built. And we went through, everybody went through this arbitrary analysis about whatever number it was. And all those went on the ballot. And the nice thing about it all was the community voted all 4 measures down. Mm. And we got back into really looking at planning in the whole different way, in the way we should have. Where should housing go? How should we build it? What it should look like. We didn't ever, and we still haven't, really solved the problem of infrastructure and services and providing the adequate services and facilities that we need. But that's all. Ongoing issue. It's an ongoing issue today with all the housing we're trying to encourage. And in some ways, today's issues are very similar because we still haven't grappled with where the housing should go, what the housing should be, how affordable it should be. These are all issues that are still out there on the table.
Now, a major issue in planning right now is working with diverse neighborhoods, communities, and teams. How do you feel like this has been important in your work?
It's critical because, again, the people in the neighborhood and the community are what the plan is about, who it's for, the current generation and the future generation. Planners really need, and politicians really need to understand those communities. They need to build trust. They need to respect what those communities have and understand the differences, the different needs that different cultures may have, or the different way that they view the use of the neighborhood. And I think planners really have to understand that and be part of that. And I think, I used to tell people I prefer that they take a 3-hour lunch in a neighborhood rather than to sit behind the computer and run numbers. I think it's critical to understand neighborhoods, and critical to understand the people and build that rapport so that you can work together as a community rather than I'm doing it because I'm the planner and you're fighting me because I don't understand you.
Yeah. So I recently relocated to San Diego from Canada, and I've noticed in my work quite a few differences from my previous work. Have you come across this at all, or can you speak to that at all?
I have. I've known some planning directors in Vancouver and worked with them. And we have some Canadian developers that have come down here. When they build in Canada, they're required to think about design, to think about the type of housing, to really contribute greatly to the services and amenities that go with the neighborhood, and other little things that really make their buildings part of their neighborhood and make the neighborhood complete. We have never asked for that, and we used to get sort of side glances from Canadian developers saying, we would do all this stuff if you asked us, and we never did, and that's unfortunate.
Well, Mike, thank you so much for coming in and speaking with us. That was all the questions I have. Really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.